Throughout American history, the powers that be have constantly and aggressively oppressed and suppressed Black economic prosperity and financial independence through systems like slavery and Jim Crow, and through the countless discriminatory and racist policies that have been put into place to directly um, inhibit Black businesses and Black growth. And despite this, Black people have been able to find some level of economic success. Although those that were able to find it were in a and are in a vast minority. In the book, The History of Black Business in America, Dr. Juliet Walker talks about this and how Black people uh, found success in how they were oppressed. Uh, and in her final chapter, she talks specifically about the Civil War era and the issues and struggles that Black people um, and Black businesses faced uh, in that time. And that's what I'll be talking about in this video. So to begin with some instances of Black economic suppression, I'll start with a quote directly from Abraham Lincoln. He said, reduce the supply of Black labor by colonizing the Black laborers out of the country, and by precisely so much you increase the demand for and the wages of white labor. So this was a not an uncommon idea to essentially forcibly remove the free Black population out of the United States in order for there to be less competition for white jobs. And this was, yeah, like I said, this was a very common thought process, pretty common opinion among white Northerners. And they didn't, because they did not value Black economic progression. And Lincoln himself did not value, through this quote, this is of course one piece of evidence, did not value Black economic progression. Um, Another example of the suppression of Black business and Black prosperity was the Confederate terrorists who often operated out of Canada and would attack businesses um, in the Union. Specifically, they were concentrated on New York, um, and they would attack primarily businesses like hotels and wharves, where Black people were able to find like consistent, steady employment. Um, and yeah, they attacked them in order to scare Black people and uh, inhibit their growth and inhibit their economic success. Um, Another example of Black economic suppression is the antebellum Blacks who were successful struggled during the Civil War. Like, for example, LaCroix brothers who lived in Louisiana lost a lot of money. They had fortunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was reduced significantly during the Civil War. And while they weren't destitute, um, they were their fortunes were significantly reduced. Another example of economic suppression or another example of economic suppression was the lack of care that the U.S. and specifically the U.S. government had for Black people coming out of the Civil War. An example of this is the Freedmen's Bank and the failure of the Freedmen's Bank, which originally had $57 million put into it by Black people. And when it closed due to mismanagement by the white leaders of the business of the bank, was only able to pay out uh, just over $2 million to those that held accounts with them. So $57 million to 2 point something million is a significant reduction in the amount of money that people had. Another example of Black economic suppression was the United States colored troops and the Union Army did not receive their pay for the first 18 months of their service. Um, and right, that's obvious how that is economically suppressive. And their wives had to work to support them and their kids, often by selling goods to other members of the military, and their husbands were only able to collect uh, food and goods from the commissary because they had no money. So, like I said, there was, of course, examples of Black economic success throughout American history, and of course during the Civil War era as well. So one example where Black people who worked in and around the railroads uh, were some of the most prosperous, and that was just because of the uh, how how much the railroad system had expanded leading up to the Civil War, and during the Civil War, the increase in travel and transportation um, led to these businesses that were usually like restaurants and hotels and in the service industry, um, or shops as well were pretty successful too, uh, as a result of the railroads. Um, Another successful group were those that worked in informally, um, who informally produced, who informally earned money in the prisoner uh, military prison complex. So it was often slaves in the Confederacy, slaves who worked at the prisons performing like menial labor or janitorial services. They would they would provide goods and clothing to the Union soldiers who were in prison. And they didn't make much money from this, but it was enough for them to continue to do it throughout the Civil War. Um, Another group that found success were those in Union occupied territories. So specifically the city of St. Louis, uh, their service industries like barbers um, were able to make more money than even that they saw even more than what they had before the Civil War. And those who operated steamboats as well. Some Black people were able to procure business contracts with the military. Thomas Day is an example of that. He was a cabinet maker and he provided his services to the Union Army. And Francis Portis was another um, Black individual who was able to get a military contract with the Confederacy, and he was a butcher and provided meat. And uh, Black business owners were able to um, purchase a entertainment hall in Baltimore, Maryland, and that's another example of successful Black businessmen. And they created an entertainment hall that was not only prosperous for them, but for their community and allowed for a space of community in Baltimore being the first Black entertainment hall. So the next question I would like to answer is how are Black people, how do they find their success? Like, what was the main factor? And for anybody who's successful, I think we have to look at luck, their hard work, and their skill or talent that they had. And I think the determining factor for Black people was luck, because you had to be extremely lucky to be born a free person. As a Black person, you had to be very lucky to be born free. And hard work and skill is something that anybody can work hard. Uh, Anybody can have a skill, but not anybody can be lucky. So I think that is the uh, main driver, main uh, determining factor for whether or not you could be successful as a Black person. Even those that were successful in slavery, they had to be lucky to be born to a slave owner who was at least somewhat gracious and was willing to let them purchase their freedom or hire out their own time. Um, and how should we as Black Americans achieve economic success today? I think to answer this question, we have to look at the best predictors for your wealth and your economic success. And I look at education and generational wealth. So, n number one, education. I think it should be a goal for everybody to go to college, and actually seriously consider options even after college, to continue your education because that is a direct correlation to the amount of money you will earn in your lifetime. And then, of course, generational wealth and focusing on being less materialistic, and actually investing in yourself and in long-term investments like property, um, in order to give uh, a better baseline, right, for your children, because that is the primary factor in determining how your outcome, your economic state is the state of your parents. And I think we have to put more emphasis on community, and we have to look back to communities like um, uh, Black Wall Street in Tulsa and countless others that were destroyed. But what they were able to do successfully was build a Black community that was self-sufficient, self-reliant, um, that didn't center white people on their way to become successful. In closing, I think this book was meant to show the resiliency of the Black community within America since its inception and since before this country technically existed, right? Since 1619, since the first Black people were brought over here as slaves, um, we have been found a way uh, to make it despite everything that has said we shouldn't. I think she also, in this book, Dr. Walker also emphasizes uh, African business ethics and African traditions, and how that has influenced successful Black business people, whether it's things like provision grounds or in Black communities, and that were pooling their money together, um, in order to fund like venture capital for other Black businesses, and the importance of community within Black businesses, shows how important African business ethics. Um, and I think that again we have to decentralize the if we as Black people want to become successful, we have to decentralize white people from economic success and as the only people who are prosperous in America. Thank you for listening.